If you're unfamiliar with the genre of black metal, then the little you probably do know involves screamy vocals, Scandinavian dudes in black and white face paint, and an obsession with the occult. They played a big role in the 90s satanic panic that shaped most of that era's media discussion. What you might not know is that behind that veil of somewhat goofy edginess is something far darker, and something that's in far more urgent need of being addressed. Much like North America, black metal has been developing a Nazi problem for at least the past 30 years. The genre began in the mid-1980s with UK band Venom's eponymous 1982 record, setting the stage for the first wave of black metal, which consisted of bands like Bathory, Merciful Fate, Celtic Frost, and Sodom. In this earliest stage of the genre, black metal was more so the name for satanic metal, rather than having its own developed sound. It wouldn't be until later that decade that the early Norwegian black metal scene would take hold, giving the genre its more definitive sound, consisting of tremolo-picked guitars, buzzsaw distortion, blast beats, and gritty lo-fi production. This so-called second wave of black metal brought forth bands like Mayhem, Thorns, Darkthrone, Burzum, Emperor, and Dissection. And if you're versed in the subject already, you probably know what comes next. Nearly every band or artist I just mentioned is in some way implicit in white supremacist or fascist behavior, up to and including murder. Most famous of these is Varg Vikernes, sole member of Burzum, who is most famous for the murder of former bandmate Euronymous, and for the burnings of several historical churches in Sweden. More important to this video, however, is his role in the development of NSBM, or National Socialist Black Metal. NSBM is exactly what it sounds like. It's black metal that espouses and promotes fascist ideals, either blatantly or subliminally. Some of the most prominent examples of outright NSBM bands are Absurd and Peste Noire, but for as much as it sucks that those bands exist and are the way that they aren't the focus of this video. No, I want to talk about the bands that you don't see on Wikipedia's list of NSBM bands, because unfortunately, it's a demonstrably large portion of the community. Because you'd never outright hear someone say, "Yeah, I'm a Nazi," the onus sits on the listener to do the research and decide what to do from there. Firstly, I think you need to ask yourself, is this worth the effort? I would never shame someone for avoiding black metal on the basis of its reputation as a Nazi safe space, because frankly, it can be tough to justify the effort you have to put in sometimes. Digging through interviews and liner notes to see if you can find phrases and symbols that might be dog whistles is a ton of effort, and frankly, if you don't even like the music that much, it's probably not worth it just to figure out which bands you can't listen to, considering you probably weren't going to listen to them anyways. For me, black metal is one of the most exciting and interesting scenes in metal right now, with the most boundary-pushing innovation and a focus on atmosphere that isn't really represented with the same care elsewhere. Its extremity and depravity act as a backdrop for the pure vibes of it, but like I kind of have always said, there's nothing more depraved than being a white nationalist, and that's why I'm making this video. To start, I'm going to show you the easiest way to quickly weed out any sketchy ties a band might have. Watch this. See, for Behemoth, it was pretty immediately obvious just from this search where the band leans politically. Now watch. And for summoning, it was just as easy in the opposite direction. Replacing NSBM with Nazi or fascist also works. Now, I've picked two extreme examples to show how easy it can be, but this is probably the least reliable of any of the tactics I'll be showing today. An issue I find incredibly often is that the top result will be the Wikipedia page for National Socialist black metal, which is not super helpful given the article includes opposite examples. With this method, you will still likely have to do a bit of digging, and for bands on either extreme of the popularity scale, it can be difficult to find any information at all, either buried or just non-existent. That's where we come to my personal favorite resource, the Red and Anarchist black metal subreddit. Not only do they share tons of amazing and safe black metal bands to listen to every single day, they also have two essential pinned posts for any left-leaning fans of the genre. First is this long and detailed list of comrade and sketch-free labels and organizations, which is the perfect way to find underground musicians in the genre who could absolutely use your support. Secondly, the real reason we're here is the Is X Sketch thread, where essentially people ask if a band is sketchy, and other people give as much information as they can about why they are or are not. On the most recent iteration of the thread, you can very easily just Control F to see if a band you're looking for has been talked about before, and look from there. Some of these connections are more damning than others, and a lot of the time it's going to be up to you to decide what you're comfortable with. So what if you want to start doing the research for yourself? Well, here's where it gets tricky, but also where I think the real importance of this video lies, because the methods we use here can be just as effective in the real world as in metal. Black metal may have a long history of being a safe space for white supremacy, but it's not unique in that regard, and the lessons you learn from being a politically engaged fan are equally valuable for use in the real world. First step, let's talk about symbols. This is where my video is going to get demonetized if it hasn't already. I don't think I need to tell you that if a band uses a swastika or Iron Cross imagery, that should be enough to tip you off, but there are some other lesser known ones that are still just as important to keep an eye out for, if not more because of the lower visibility. First up is the sun wheel, or the Sonnenrad in German. This one is similar to the Nordic symbols that we'll get to in a second, in that it's a fairly mainstream ancient European symbol that was only later appropriated by Nazis to invent some horseshit mythology around their ideology. Viking metal band Bathory's album Hammerheart has this symbol on the back of its cover, which would definitely be worthy of some suspicion if not for later statements and interviews exemplifying that the band clearly do not hold fascist beliefs. Otherwise, though, it's a pretty strong indication at the very least. The aforementioned Nordic runes are another one that people will often dispute, but there are three in particular that are really telling, those being the Life rune, the Roman Othala rune, and the Wolf's Angel. These have all been taken and used to help fabricate that same mythology around white supremacy, to give a feeling of owning your heritage and crushing the enemy. All of this is horseshit, of course, but I think it's important to show them and to explain it to demonstrate how, unfortunately, a genre as aggressive as this, with such roots in paganism, would naturally attract anti-Semitism and white supremacy. There's a couple other symbols as well that should be a bit more obvious if you see them, but a lot of people still don't know. I'm showing them on screen right now for a second, so you can get an idea of what to look out for. Next, let's look at band members and side projects. My personal favorite tool for this is the site Rate Your Music, where you can see a complete list of every member a band has ever had, and from there you can click and see what other bands they've been a part of. For Batushka here, you can see that Krzysztof, the main member of the band, has played in a band called Sturmovik, which, if you look into them, is an explicitly anti-fascist crust punk band, so not sketchy. With Deathspell Omega, on the other hand, it's a little harder because the band has never confirmed their lineup. A quick Google search, though, will show us that the vocalist is almost certainly Mikko Aspa, who has played in and continues to play in several straight-up NSBM bands, so pretty clearly worth shitlisting. It's also worth looking into NSBM festivals. Whether or not they deny the label, if they play an explicitly fascist festival, then they're clearly okay with profiting off of and supporting that image for their own band, and that is unacceptable. Now let's quickly look at interviews. For a lot of smaller or older black metal bands, this might not be an option, but for bigger or more recent groups, this can be a pretty good way of finding the band explicitly stating their political leanings. In my experience, the most common question for this to come up, if they aren't asked explicitly, is the question of influences. Most black metal these days is heavily inspired by Burzum, and most of the time, a band will bring this up and then heavily criticize the man's actual beliefs. Generally, this is enough for me to feel comfortable. If they don't, or if the topic doesn't come up, you can usually tell from other full interviews, and if not, the other options should be enough. Finally, and this is the most time-consuming, but can also provide the most valuable insights if nothing else works, look at the band's Twitter, and especially their Facebook. I say especially Facebook because as a social media platform, it's close to dead in the public consciousness, and so it's where slip-ups and mask-off moments are most likely to happen. Murmur is a good example of this, expressing some heavily racist sentiments and also just being an outright COVID denier on his Facebook. A particular member of the band Agalok has, in the past, made anti-Semitic jokes on their public Facebook, referring to it as Jew Book, but more importantly, the band has come out more recently and not only denounced those statements, but come out publicly in support of BLM and expressed a need to do more than just call out behavior like this from members of the band, but to reach out and confront it on a personal level. Clearly not the ramblings of an anti-Semite, that's for sure. Twitter can also be a good option, particularly because you can see an account's likes publicly, which, especially with the political climate being as tense and as online as it is, can very quickly give you an idea of where they stand. But, as with anyone, you shouldn't use liked tweets as damning pieces of evidence. Rather, it can be a good indication that it might be time to start digging. So ultimately, we've figured out how to find and how to avoid fascists in metal, but what can you do to fight it? Obviously, an easy personal solution would just be to pirate or not listen to the artist's music at all. But my biggest suggestion? Make more anti-fascist black metal. For the longest time, the genre has been a safe space for white supremacy and elitism to be expressed and promoted to an audience of disenfranchised white teenagers looking for a place in the world. And young white men in particular are prime suspects for radicalization towards the right. It is our job to get to them first and to show them that their frustrations in life aren't invalid and that there is something they can do to move towards and to better the world around them. Art is one of the best ways to do this, but community is another one. Reach out to newer fans of the genre and recommend them red and anarchist black metal bands to start with. Support labels that take a firm anti-fascist stance and buy their music if you can. Labels like Bindrune, Profane Existence, Mystic Chaos, all put amazing sketch-free extreme metal, and that's just to name a small handful. The fight against modern fascism is a real one, it's one that we can't lose a grip on, and it's a fight we need to extend to every field bigotry takes root in. This is about more than just music, this is about the rights and the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people. I'll see you in the mosh pit.